Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, specifically you, Knicks fans. Glad to have you be watching today's video focused on your New York Knicks. In this offseason preview, we have done a series of offseason previews on the channel up to this point, specifically for teams, by the day I'm recording this, that have not made the postseason, simply because the teams in the postseason, their seasons clearly haven't ended yet. So the New York Knicks, unfortunately, did not get back to where they were the year prior. But I still think they are in an intriguing position moving forward because they weren't terrible this year. And I think that's kind of the MO with how the media treated them this year. They kind of treated the Knicks like they were terrible, and they weren't terrible. They just weren't nearly as good as they were the year prior. And there's a lot of reasons why. We'll talk about that in today's video and more. So Knicks fans, if you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing, especially if you do enjoy all the hard work and research I put into these videos. I do spend a lot of time putting these all together and getting everything ready for this type of video. So again, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you do enjoy, subscribe as well. Let's jump into it here with a video preview. What exactly are we going to be talking about in this offseason preview focused on the New York Knicks? Well, first of all, we're going to look at the 2021-2022 season, which is the season that just concluded. And we're going to look at the record of the New York Knicks, what happened to cause that record, and then also some bright spots for this team specifically with how they've really, grown in certain areas and what I think the Knicks really learned about themselves this year, which I think there are some massive things that were positives for the New York Knicks this season. Then we're going to turn to some key decisions that this management and front office needs to make in order to get the Knicks back to where they want to go, which is a playoff team that'll hopefully be making deep runs in the postseason. There are quite a few decisions that this team's going to have to make. We'll talk about them and more in this video. Then we turn our eyes toward the 2022 NBA draft, which is one of the biggest decisions of the offseason for the New York Knicks because they do have their own draft pick in the lottery this year. Of course, I am recording this before the lottery. We do have a video that explains how the NBA draft lottery works on the channel. So after today's Knicks video, go check that one out by clicking on our actual channel. You have to scroll probably a couple weeks to find it, but it is definitely worth the watch because it explains exactly how the draft lottery works. And then we'll also look at prospects that the Knicks could target in the draft lottery and who they could actually look to take if there's players available there that they would want to look at. Then 2022 NBA free agency. We're going to look at the Knicks projected cap space, how much money do they have to spend this offseason, and then some potential targets that they could use to help better this team moving forward, which is really the biggest thing, right? The offseason, it's fun, it's fresh, it's exciting, but realistically, it all comes down to the nitty-gritty regular season. The 82 games are what really do matter in a lot of ways because it defines narrative. It really shows you who your team is, shows you what talent you have on your roster. And we're going to turn our eyes to next season by the end of this video. And I'm going to give my goals and expectations and also a key thing to watch for. So by the end of the video, I feel like you guys are going to have a really good understanding of what maybe the Knicks could do this offseason and a better understanding of what this roster could look like going into next year. So now let's start off with that 2021-2022 season like I talked about. And the record was 37-45, which, like I said, that's not terrible. In the West, that would have gotten you in the play-in, and the East was way, way better this year than it has been in recent memory. And I think that's partially the reason why the Knicks took a step back again this year. 37-45, though, with the way the media was dealing with the Knicks and how everyone kind of talked about them this year, you would have thought this team was 27-55. So Knicks fans, you don't have to hang your head too low. You were close to 500, which is pretty solid. Now, there's some room to grow for sure. 37-45 is just not going to get the job done, especially if you want to be a playoff team. But realistically, it's not as bad as it maybe felt this season. And part of the reason why it felt so bad is this was a regression to the mean type year. Last year, Julius Randle being an all-NBA level player, there was just a lot of stuff that went right. Derrick Rose coming in during the season and kind of played the best basketball we've seen of him the last 5 years or so. And then you look at some of the other players on the team as well. I mean, Mitchell Robinson played great. Nerlens Noel had another breakout season for himself. And then you look at some of the other things. Emmanuel quickly as a rookie the year earlier took a massive step forward. And not that he had any regression to the mean, but overall, just the whole roster itself in year two of Tom Thibodeau's tenure, it just didn't really feel the same way it felt in year one. I think there's a lot of factors into why this team regressed back to who they truly, really are. There are some bright spots here, though, for sure. When you look at Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin, those two guys started to excel specifically toward the end of the season, and I'm really, really excited about it. I'm a Dayton Flyers fan myself, so I love love Obi Toppin, and I thought the Knicks got a really good player in this kid. It's taken a little bit of time to find his footing in the NBA. It really has, but part of that is because he's been behind Julius Randle, and I think once he kind of gets a more clearly defined role, he's ready to take a massive jump forward. His athleticism is very special, and I think IQ and Obi are a really special pairing. And I think part of the issue here in New York has been role definition. You know, those two, I just think, take backseat roles when Julius Randle's on the floor. And I think there's a contrasting collection of styles here, specifically even when Fournier and Rose and even Kemba Walker, when he was still playing with the Knicks, when they were on the floor together with Julius Randle, it just, everything felt a little hodgepodge and no real sense of direction of, hey, what do we want to do? What's our offense supposed to look like? It'd almost be like trading off possessions of, oh, let our guards do some work. Oh, now it's going to be a Julius Randle isolation possession. It just didn't feel natural or right. So I think if they find better role definition moving forward, especially for IQ and OB, I feel like this team can take steps forward. And then we look at another massive plus this year, and it was RJ Barrett having a nice season at 26-3. Maybe the efficiency wasn't as high as you'd like it to be, but it was definitely a step in the right direction for Barrett, who is looked at as maybe the forgotten piece of that draft with John Morant and also Zion Williamson. Williamson's only played 85 games in 3 years, but we always know the media is covering him. And then you look at John Morant, who had an awesome year in year 2 with the, or year 3, with the Memphis Grizzlies. But nonetheless, RJ Barrett at pick 3, he's looking like a phenomenal selection. 26-3, that's tough to do. And it's pretty surprising to me that the Knicks, who usually get a lot of media attention and coverage, we didn't really hear that much about RJ Barrett's awesome season. So I do want to give him a little bit of a shout out here, just because I think he did play really, really well this past year. And I feel like he kind of almost got overshadowed, which is surprising for a New York Knick, just in today's era with how media covers New York basketball. Then you want to look at some other players that were pretty good acquisitions for this team, maybe to lesser extents than IQ and OB and RJ Barrett, but that's Deuce McBride, Jericho Sims, and I also should have put Quentin Grimes on the screen here because those three were all phenomenal additions. I think that they're all going to play lesser roles moving forward. But McBride, a very good two-way point guard who's physical, can pick up 94 feet, has quick feet. I liked him coming out of West Virginia. Jericho Sims I actually played against in high school myself, which is a funny story. But he's a very special athlete in terms of his size and length, and also, of course, his vertical explosion. He's the most athletic player vertically to at least have tested at the NBA Combine. So 48-inch vertical for a guy who's 6'10", that's pretty crazy. And, you know, he had some flashes this year, especially when he was playing with Nerlens Noel out. And then you also look at Quentin Grimes, who I think, you know, lit the world on fire for a couple weeks. Didn't play, you know, a ton of games this year, dealt with some stuff. And I think that was a big storyline for the Knicks this year as well. And it's not a bright spot for them, but the bright spot here is that they won 37 games despite dealing with a ton of injuries. Julius Randle missed some time. Nerlens Noel played less than 40 games this year. I mean, it's tough once your roster and your real rotations get cut down early. To be playing a second round center like Jericho Sims in his rookie year as much as they had to, it is tough to win in the league like that, especially when you're trying to win 40 plus games in a tough East. The fact that they won 37 with the injuries they dealt with, I do think is a bright spot, because if you go into next year healthy, maybe you can get back up to 45-ish wins, and that's a massive difference here. That's an 8-game improvement from where they were this season. Let's move forward to some key decisions. And basically the key decisions all start and stop here with Mitchell Robinson. He's headed toward unrestricted free agency because of the way his initial contract was set up. He's very young, but I think Knicks fans know how valuable this kid is. He's a really talented player with really great physical size and athleticism. And I think he is a force in the paint on both ends of the floor. He shoots a high percentage from the field because he plays within himself. And of course, you know, a few years ago, kind of lit up the world with his offseason workouts that were making everyone think, oh my goodness, Mitchell Robinson. Didn't really play itself out that way, but there's games throughout the year where he goes for like 20 points and 15 rebounds and 5 blocks, or, you know, 14 points, 20 boards, 8 blocks, something crazy. You know, Mitchell Robinson always has these crazy stat lines every once in a while. And I think for him, the biggest thing is just finding more consistency and piecing everything together to be a more consistent contributor, because he's also the type of player who's going to have 6 points and 7 rebounds in certain games. And you're like, you know, I didn't really feel Mitchell Robinson's impact as much tonight as I did the last time I watched them play. So for me, Mitchell Robinson, I think he's got to get a little bit more consistent, but he's going to have a big market this offseason. I think a lot of people are going to view him similarly to how Robert Williams got viewed for Boston, as a really nice player around that $12 to $13 million mark. And the Knicks have a little bit of a tough road ahead of them trying to keep him, because Robinson's going to have his choice on where he wants to go. And if Mitch wants to go somewhere else, he is really open to doing that. So we'll see if New York can keep him or not. Then you look at Kemba Walker. He's owed $9.165 million next season. And I feel like I just hurt every Knicks fan's feelings reading that number out loud. And I feel like I hurt the Knicks front office feelings with that. No one wants to be paying Kemba Walker that much money next year. He fell out of the rotation this year. They agreed to part ways. But realistically, he's on the books. So you owe him that money. It's fully guaranteed. You'll have to try and find a way to, maybe get off that money. Then you look at Tom Thibodeau, who I think is under a lot of pressure. We started hearing a little bit more speculation that he could be on the hot seat. I don't think he is as of right now, but with another bad season, I think he could very well be on his way out. So we'll have to watch for Tibbs this season. Then also Evan Fournier. I said it was a terrible contract when they signed him. A lot of people disagreed with me, but I think after 1 year in New York, I think Knicks fans are starting to see the writing on the wall. Evan Fournier is not the player the Knicks needed. $18 million a year is a lot for this kind of guy. And I think that they're going to try and find ways to get off of him, open up some money. We'll see if the Knicks can get that done or not. Then we move into the Julius Randle situation, which is another key decision for them. And I want to know how Knicks fans feel about it. So he's a 27-year-old who turns 28 in November, was a third-team All-NBA selection a couple years ago, but his last season wasn't that great. You look at the 29-5 splits, so 20 points a game, 9 rebounds a night, 5 assists a game. You're saying, oh, those are pretty good numbers. But it becomes a little more apparent that it isn't when you actually watch the Knicks. And also when you look at his shooting splits this year, 41% from the field, 31% from three only, and 75% from the line. They're not terrible numbers, but they're not good enough for what that contract looks like, which is about to set in here as well, which is why this is kind of painful, because this next season he'll be making $23.76 million. Year after that, 25.66. In the 2024-2025 season, it escalates to $27.56 million. And in 25-26, he has a player option for that year, which I'm telling you he's going to accept, because it's nearly $30 million. And Knicks fans, you guys should be praying for a pretty good salary cap increase in the CBA, because he is making a boatload of money based on the current CBA with the salary cap. He's making a hefty percentage, that's for sure. So for me with Julius Randle, I think the Knicks probably did overpay him. But again, do you want to sell that on one maybe not so great year from Julius Randle? I want to know Knicks fans' thoughts. You guys kind of have a feeling for mine, but I want to know what you think. Comment, keep Randle if you would want Julius Randle still on the Knicks, or comment, trade Randle if you want the Knicks to trade him this offseason. There's definitely a little bit of reasoning to both on why I think both are pretty solid options. Maybe Randle won't play as bad as he did this past year. But then again, will he ever play at the level he did when he made an All-NBA team? That's really the big question. I want to know, keep Randle or trade Randle? Comment that right now in the comment section. Moving forward to the 2022 NBA draft, and let's look at the assets that the New York Knicks have. They have their own 2022 first-round pick, which we have an NBA draft lottery video on the channel. It'll explain the odds and everything for New York, and they have their own 2022 second-rounder. So if you're a Knicks fan, you're saying, okay, we at least have 2 draft assets here that are going to help us get better. And first of all, in the first round, here's your lottery odds to have picks 1 through 4, which is how the lottery works. You have the 11th best odds, a 2% chance to pick first, 2.2% chance to pick second, 2.4% chance to pick third, and a measly 2.8% chance to pick fourth overall. So assuming they don't find any luck, they don't move up in the draft into the top 4, here are some potential draft targets that I think could make some serious and legitimate sense for the New York Knicks. Their first draft target would be Jalen Duren, if he's available, who out of Memphis is a very, very solid prospect. And I think is someone who's really intriguing, specifically to the Knicks if they feel like they are going to lose Mitchell Robinson. Now, I don't think it's super likely he's there for them at pick 11, but it's on the table. Then you could look at the next tier of centers. where, maybe it's not like a Duren or a Holmgren, but you have a Walker Kessler out of Auburn who blocks a ton of shots and I think would really fit Tom Thibodeau's defensive system very well. And then also center Mark Williams, who isn't necessarily as much of a defensive anchor as a Walker Kessler, but is a really good rim runner and screen and roll guy who can also protect the rim at a pretty solid level and maybe a little bit more switchable out into space than a Walker Kessler, who's probably going to be more limited to drop defense scheme defensively. And then you look at other point guards, because I think the Knicks could consider a point guard. Now, again, I don't think this is necessarily the most important thing, because you do have Emmanuel Quickley, who maybe you want to continue growing in that way. And Julius Randle does have the basketball in his hands quite a bit as well. But Dyson Daniels, he's an intriguing option here. He's a bigger point guard, played for the NBA G League Ignite program. And he's also a pretty solid defensive player who can probably guard 1 through 3 on day one of his NBA career. Pretty good length and quickness as well to really power up his defensive capabilities. And then you look at a guy like Ty Washington, who's not the defensive player of a Dyson Daniels, but he is a better offensive player. He's more skilled as a scorer in the mid-range area, pretty good facilitator. Dyson Daniels, not a bad facilitator in his own right, but Daniels offensively, not the best shooter. Ty Washington, maybe a reluctant shooter, but I think he's not capable of knocking it down with consistency. So both of them are on the table here, but I think that if you wanted to stray away from a point guard, you could afford to get away with it, unless it's one of the top guys. Like, say they get the top 4 pick. I mean, Jaden Ivey does make a lot of sense. You could also still strongly consider a guy like Chet Holmgren, or maybe, along the lines of a Jabari Smith, Paul Banchero. I think all options are really on the table for the Knicks if they do move up into the top 4. Then you look at guard Johnny Davis here out of Wisconsin. He's a talented combo guard. Again, I think he's better with the ball in his hands, though, which makes the fit with Randle and Quickley a little confusing, especially with Derrick Rose on the roster as well, assuming they don't make any moves. It does just feel a little monotonous to me to go with Johnny Davis. And then a guy who I think actually does really fit well with New York. I don't think he'll be available at pick 11, but if he was, it'd be AJ Griffin, son of former NBA player Adrian Griffin. And he's one of the players who I think a lot of teams are going to have interest in, because he just fits so seamlessly onto an NBA roster as a 4-man. Kind of reminds me of DeAndre Hunter or Patrick Williams. Maybe not quite as skilled as those two were, but he's kind of got that same frame to him. He's going to play the 4. He's going to have some good physicality to him, be a solid defender. He's going to knock down open jump shots, and he's just going to play the game the way that you need a 4-2 in today's NBA. So good size, good frame, solid positional defender, understands where to be on the floor, and is selfless in the way that he plays basketball. So I think AJ Griffin, an intriguing option on Duke here as well. And these draft targets would really help the Knicks moving forward. I think best case they get Duren, and then see if they can maybe even find a sign and trade for Mitchell Robinson. That would be intriguing to me. Maybe you can bring back a talented wing or guard in that pathway, but we'll see exactly how the Knicks play out. Then you go into NBA free agency here, and they're actually projected to have a practical cap space of negative $4.866 million. So you might be saying, okay, content creator at Utility Sports, how do you use negative nearly $5 million in cap space and improve this team? Well, there's a few ways. First of all, we'll start with the stuff at the bottom there where it says can use non-taxpayer mid-level exception. That's around $10.5 million annually. So you could go into the marketplace and use your exception here to sign a player to a 3-year, $31.5 million deal, or a 2-year, $21 million deal, or even just a flat 1-year, $10.5 million deal. You could also split that up into 2 contracts. So you could give out 2 1-year, $5.25 million deals. I hope that makes sense in the way that it works. But essentially, you can add an extra $10.5 million contract, or a combination of contracts up to $10.5 million annually onto this roster. That could be 1 good role player or 2 okay role players, which would be valuable for New York. Otherwise, you have flexibility to open up cap space. Maybe you go through and trade Kemba Walker to a team looking for assets. We talked about that $9 million number attached to Kemba Walker that I don't think anyone really wants to pay him. But maybe if you give up a future 2nd-round asset, a team like the Orlando Magic, Oklahoma City Thunder, Houston Rockets, so on and so forth, would be willing to say, yeah, we'll take on Kemba Walker's expiring contract just for the price of a 2nd-rounder. We're not really planning on using our own cap space really aggressively this offseason. So let's go ahead, bring in a little small extra draft asset and see if we can use it to help improve our team down the road. So there is flexibility to get off Kemba. And then potentially you could send out any one or combination of Evan Fournier at $18 million. Again, I don't think his contract's good. I think a lot of teams around the league are going to have no interest in that. But you never know. There might be a suitor, maybe one out in Los Angeles, named the Lakers, You could look at it, Nerlens Noel deal, even though I don't love that. I think $9.24 million is actually a pretty good number for him. And I don't think they should trade him, but I mean, if they really were desperate to open up money, they could. You could trade Derrick Rose's $14.52 million. Again, a team out in Los Angeles, named the Lakers, might have interest in that one. And you could also look at Alec Burks, who's one of the more consistent guards for the Knicks, at $10.01 million. Again, I don't love the idea of trading him, but you know, if you want to incentivize a team to take in Fournier or Rose, Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel would be good incentivizers in that because they are pretty good at their price points. And then I want to know, Knicks fans, doesn't Evan Fournier, Alec Burks, and Derrick Rose trade for Russell Westbrook in a 2027 unprotected first from the Lakers make sense? To me, it really, really does, and I'm going to break down why here. And I know Knicks fans are going to say, whoa, I thought you wanted to have the ball in Emmanuel Quickley's hands a little bit more and kind of find a little bit better identity with the Knicks. Yeah, you still can do that if you have Russell Westbrook. You might just buy him out and say, okay, goodbye, Russ. We don't really want you. We don't need you. Or you could keep him. I mean, if they feel like they want to be a playoff team, I still think Russ is a good player. I just think it was a terrible fit with the Lakers. And then realistically, you know, Evan Fournier, his contract, $18 million, not only this next season, but the year after as well, before you finally have a team option on that. You could get off of that. Derrick Rose making, again, $14.52 million. That's a lot of money for what he's been in terms of health and production this past season. And I know Alec Burks, he's good, but you're going to have to incentivize a team like the Lakers to take him. They're going to be looking for role players and guys who can fit around LeBron and AD. And I think Fournier, Burks, and Rose is a pretty good combination of guards that could help them. And in turn, you get an unprotected first from one of the most dysfunctional franchises in the NBA, specifically when LeBron isn't there. Let's not forget how bad they were back in like 2017, 2018. That 2027 first might be really valuable. I know it might not help the current GM, but you know, it's still an asset that I think is worth trading for. And then you also look at the reality here. Westbrook's an expiring contract. The 2023 free agency class is supposed to be better. It opens up cap flexibility for your roster and your organization. I do think it does make some legitimate sense. And let's be honest with ourselves, out of all these players here, Fournier, Burks, and Rose, and Westbrook, I think Russ is still the best player out of that list. So you not only get an unprotected first, but you also get Russell Westbrook. Now, maybe you throw in a guy like Nerlens Noel into this deal if the Lakers want him, and then maybe you can even swindle Talen Horton-Tucker back if you give back a couple of second rounders or something. There's a few ways here that the Knicks can really improve this team, and I think that this is one that they should actually really explore before free agency. But then in free agency, again, there's ways they can improve this team. You look at the mid-level exception. Again, this could be up to $10.5 million annually. You could look at a point guard in Tyus Jones, who was drafted by the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round, ended up not really working out there, but has found a home in Memphis where he's been really, really important. Think about how good the Grizzlies have been without Ja Morant this year. Tyus Jones is a big reason why. He's a good disruptive point guard who I think would fit Tom Thibodeau's defensive system. And I think the Knicks did actually miss Elfrid Payton a little bit more than people really thought. Not that Elfrid Payton's a great player or a player you'd want on your playoff team, but throughout an 82-game regular season in Tom Thibodeau's system, Tyus Jones is an improvement over Elfrid Payton, and I think actually does really, really work well in the Knicks system here with Tibbs as the head coach. Otherwise, you could look at a connector piece like Kyle Anderson, also from the Grizzlies, who, if you're trying to find ways to connect the combination of Julius Randle and RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin, you need selfless players in there who are going to make the right pass, cut when there's opportunities to do so, and just play the game the right way. And Kyle Anderson does that almost all the time. You know, he's very Spursy in that way. Of course, started his career with San Antonio and just has been a good player throughout his career. Then Isaiah Hardenstein, another option here. If you do lose Mitchell Robinson and you're looking for a depth big, I think Hardenstein really has built himself a long-term NBA career with his play this past year for the Clippers. Went from being sort of an NBA journeyman to actually really valuable for the Clippers this past season. Now, I know in the play-in, Ty Lue really did cut his minutes, but I think that was sort of a mistake because Hardenstein, he's a talented left-handed big who can step out to the three-point line, knock it down with some regularity. Also has a nice little push shot from 6 to 10 feet and a little floater when he catches outside the restricted area. Pretty good scorer around the rim. And then also when you look at him, defensively is really where he stood out for me, especially when you look at advanced metrics and statistics. And even just watching the games, you could feel it. He actually held the lowest field goal percentage against at the rim this year, which is crazy. He was a better interior defender statistically than Rudy Gobert. Now, he didn't have the same volume as Gobert. and realistically wasn't relied on as much as Gobert, but he was really good in the opportunities he had at it, which shows massive improvement from where he was a few years ago, back when he was with the Houston Rockets. And I think now, if you're looking at the Knicks, I think he does fit the system there in New York pretty well for the big man spot. But if they do open cap space, and the crazy thing is they could still use the mid-level exception after opening cap space as well. But if they did open cap space, I mean, it's the New York Knicks, right? So they could go look at a guy like Zach LaVine. I think if I had to bet, I would bet on LaVine being a Bull next season. I'm not saying I think LaVine will go to the Knicks, but it's the New York Knicks. If they can get a meeting with him, you never really know what can happen from there. Maybe he says, I want to play at Madison Square Garden. I want to be a New York Knick. It's basically what happened with Carmelo Anthony when he forced a trade to the Knicks. So Zach LaVine very possibly could consider himself an actual New York Knick at some point. Now, again, I think this is highly unlikely. Center Deandre Ayton from the Phoenix Suns. If you're losing Mitchell Robinson, if you open up cap space, maybe go out and try and improve at the center spot. And Deandre Ayton is a big improvement. He's a more skilled offensive center with some of the same defensive capabilities. So I think Ayton would be an intriguing grab. Again, I think this one's even more unlikely than Zach LaVine, but it's the Knicks. If they want to try and make a big splash, they just need to convince one player, and it could be impactful for them. Lonnie Walker here, he's a restricted free agent as well. Kind of is falling out of favor there with the Spurs. You know, Primo started eating some more of his minutes closer to the end of the year. He's solid, but I think Lonnie Walker probably doesn't move the needle enough for the Knicks, but I think he's going to get a $12 to $13 million a year contract, so I don't think he's going to fit the mid-level exception. He's an interesting player, kind of another connector piece with decent defensive capabilities. Not sure if he moves the needle enough. And a player I don't actually have listed on here, but I think is a massive fit and possibility for the Knicks is Jalen Brunson, guard from the Dallas Mavericks. He's going to get a hefty payday because of his 40-plus point performance the other night against the Utah Jazz in round one of the playoffs in game 2 of that series. But realistically, I think the Knicks had him on their radar before that game. You know, he's headed toward unrestricted free agency, which is rare. You usually don't have a player as young as Brunson out there in unrestricted free agency. And the fact that they could potentially bring him in using cap space, I think is going to be very intriguing to New York and the front office there. And I know that they were in attendance to game 1 of the Jazz versus Mavs, and I know a lot of people assumed it had to do with Donovan Mitchell. I think they were there to scout Jalen Brunson. I really do believe so. Brunson had a good game in game 1, a great game in game 2 of that series. So we'll see. Maybe Brunson's the name to watch for the New York Knicks moving forward. Comment your thoughts below, Knicks fans. Do you want Jalen Brunson to be a New York Knick next season? Then we move on to next season. Is it a bounce back year? That's really the big question, Knicks fans. I want to know if you think it's going to be a big time bounce back year for the Knicks. For me, I think it could be, but it's going to take a little bit, right? They're going to need to find that defensive effort and energy. That's really another one of those big differences from year 1 to year 2 of Thibodeau's tenure there in New York. Year 1, they were scrambling, high energy defensively, and it led to a lot of wins. Year 2, things just weren't going right. I felt like the defensive intensity kind of let up a little bit, and they just weren't the same team. Realistically, though, they should be a play-in team. When you look at the talent here, I think they can compete with the Charlottes and the Clevelands of the world. At least that should be the plan for them. Maybe they could outright be a playoff team. I think that's a little bit of a high expectation for this roster, but you never know. If something crazy happens in free agency, I feel like they could open themselves up as maybe just an outright playoff team. And then this is going to be a big season next year for Tom Thibodeau and his future with the New York Knicks. His tenure in Minnesota ended dramatically and terribly. His time in Chicago came to an abrupt end, and that didn't end super pretty either. So I think Thibodeau, he's someone who, when it works really well, but when it doesn't, it kind of ends ugly. So I think this season's going to be really, really massive for potentially extending Tom Thibodeau's time in New York or cutting it short. We'll see exactly. Knicks fans, I do want to know your thoughts on today's video. Hopefully you guys did really enjoy. It's a lot of fun bringing this content to you. I do put a lot of time and effort into the research and everything that I need to present in these videos. So I do hope you enjoy. If you did, thank you again so much for watching. Please subscribe, hit the like button as well. Turn on the notification bell. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Links for those socials are in the description as well. Thanks again so much, Knicks fans, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.